I'm Maggie Salinas. I'm the Director of Adult Protective Services, and we cover McHenry, Kane, and Kendall County. I also have Isabel Lopez with me as well. She is the APS supervisor, so she oversees the northern end of Kane County and then McHenry County as well. So today we just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of what we do and hopefully answer some questions that you have. I probably am going to wait until the end to answer questions. So if you just, again, type them in the chat, we'll get to them at the end. So the goals of the APS program are to investigate reports of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and also self-neglect. The ultimate goal for us is to prevent any further abuse, neglect, or self-neglect from taking place. And ultimately, what we do is we provide resources, services, funds, and education to maximize. AV stands for alleged victims, quality of life, and care. So one of the big things that we like to go over with providers and staff here as well too is just kind of what constitutes an APS intake. So there are certain criteria that must be met in order for it to be categorized as a report of abuse, neglect, exploitation, or self-neglect. So there must be an alleged victim who's 60 years of age or older, or an adult that's 18 to 59 with a disability. Now, that's kind of a gray area for us. So a lot of the times people, when they see that or hear that, they think disability, meaning that you have to be on disability benefits. That is not the case. It is a very gray area for us. So if an individual is got terminal cancer, mental health issues, really, it's very open, and it's a broad spectrum for us on the types of cases that we'll take that fall into that disability category. So we usually just tell everybody, if you're questioning, just call us. Again, it's better to err on the side of caution and report something than to not. An allegation or allegations must be made which, if true, would constitute abuse, neglect, or exploitation, or self-neglect. The allegations must have occurred within the past 12 months. Or if the allegations occurred prior to the 12 months previous, the effects of the allegations must continue to adversely affect the alleged victim. We do get a lot of callers that will call with things that had happened, over 5 years ago or several years ago. And usually we'll still take information, but a lot of the times what's happening is this APS is not taking those cases. We're referring them to other entities or giving it over to our information and assistance team so they can follow up with individuals. The alleged victim must reside in a domestic setting at the time of the report. There is one exception to this rule. So if a resident is in a skilled long-term care facility, the abuser resides in the community and is not an employee or otherwise affiliated with the facility. So basically, the confusing part for people is if somebody is in a long-term care facility and there are allegations of abuse by a staff member, that is typically going to go to our ombudsman program. Now, for APS, we investigate allegations that are typically in the community. The only time we're going to take a call in a long-term care setting is if the allegation is financial exploitation. So again, if they're in a long-term care setting and there's concerns that abuse is taking place and it's at the hands of a staff member, that's going to go to ombudsman. If it's a financial allegation, then that would potentially be us. And again, even if you're unsure, we're still taking the information and then we're just directing it appropriately to the right person. Okay, so what is an allegation? You need two things for an allegation. So you need a perpetrator. So a report of abuse cannot be taken on a case where the caller or the reporter does not know who the person is causing the abuse. So the perpetrator can only be a family member or a caregiver. So the example that we get is my mom has bruises all over her body. I just know someone is hurting her. But if we don't know who, then it's not an allegation. Then we go to an act, right? We need an act. So the reporter must provide information that the abuse being reported meets the criteria. So the example that we have is my mom has bruises all over her body. If we don't know the cause of the bruising, how do we know that it was an act of abuse? Again, we're going to ask more probing questions. Are they taking certain types of medication? Maybe they have a history of falling and that's why there's bruising. So again, we're going to ask those additional probing questions to find out if it's, fitting the criteria. Next, we're going to kind of go into the different areas of abuse that we cover. So one of those areas is physical abuse. So that is the causing of infliction of physical pain or injury to an older person or person with a disability. So that can include the following. So pulling hair, slapping, battery, burning, hitting. And the one area that people don't often really think about is this last piece of over medicating. So that does fall under the physical abuse category for us, and that is something that we would look into. The next type of abuse is sexual abuse. So that's the touching, fondling, or any other sexual activity with an older adult or an adult with a disability where they are unable to understand, unwilling to consent, threatened, or physically forced to engage in sexual behavior. Next is emotional abuse. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Verbal assaults, threats of abuse, harassment, intimidation, destruction of property, humiliation. Again, something that people don't often think of would be abuse of animals. Again, those types of circumstances, a lot of the times we're working with animal control. So again, we're getting another entity involved, but that is, again, something that we would look into. Next is confinement. So confinement is the restraining or isolating of an older person or adult with a disability other than medical reasons. So restraining, denying somebody access to their phone or mail. We do see that frequently and people don't, again, often think of that. Isolating them, controlling their activities, limiting the time person spends with loved ones. We get a lot of cases where there are family dynamics, right? So a common theme for us that we see is family members will call actually on each other stating, well, my brother is not letting me see mom. I've tried calling, I've tried going to the home, he's not letting me see her. Again, that is a potential confinement issue. We're going to ask those probing questions though, right? Again, is there an order of protection maybe that's in place? Again, kind of getting more details to kind of decide how we're going to go about our investigation. But that's kind of a common theme that we see for confinement is a lot of family dynamics and families calling on each other because a loved one is denying access. Okay, these are the three different areas of neglect. So passive neglect is failure by a caregiver to provide an eligible adult with the necessities of life. So that can include, but it's not limited to, so food, clothing, shelter, or medical care, because of failure to understand the eligible adult's needs, lack of awareness of services to help meet needs, or a lack of capacity to care for the eligible adults. Now, the next piece, this willful deprivation, so that's the big difference, right? Is passive neglect is non-intentional, right? There's just not a full understanding of what someone's needs may be. Where willful deprivation means that you're deliberately denying somebody with the necessities of life. So you're denying them medication, medical care, shelter, food, therapeutic devices, or other physical assistance. So it's exposing them to a risk of physical, mental, or emotional harm. And it does not include the discontinuation of medical care or treatment when the eligible adult has expressed a desire to forego such medical treatment or care. A big thing with our program is that if an individual is alert and oriented, they have the right to self-determine. And I think that that is probably one of not only the frustrating things for people that are putting in reports, but for staff too, right? Because again, you want to offer services, you want to protect and help. But if somebody is alert and oriented, they have the right to make unsafe decisions, as hard as that is. And then the last area for neglect is abandonment. So abandonment means the desertion or willful forsaking of an eligible adult by an individual responsible for the care and custody of that eligible adult, under circumstances in which a reasonable person would continue to provide care and custody. So probably the best example that I can give in this area is we will frequently get calls from hospitals where individuals are saying, you know what, I can't care for mom or dad anymore. This is your problem now. I can't do this. And they're not picking them up or they're not returning calls. That is probably the most common thing that we're seeing for abandonment is definitely from the hospitals. Next, we get into self-neglect. So what is considered self-neglect? Self-neglect is a condition that results from an individual's inability to perform essential self-care tasks that substantially threaten. And the reason we stress that is because, again, you'll get calls where somebody may say, okay, I think the house is really messy. It's in disarray. There's a lot of paperwork all over the place. Okay, well, if there's a lot of paperwork all over the place, that's not going to substantially threaten somebody, right? So again, we wouldn't take a case like that. Again, we would take the information and refer it elsewhere if we felt that they could benefit from another resource, but that's not something that we're going to look into. So some examples of things that we would look into. So we want to see, again, essential things like food, clothing, shelter, healthcare. Is an individual refusing or not wanting those things? We're going to look into that. So obtaining goods and services necessary to maintain physical health, mental health, emotional well-being, and general safety. So again, to just kind of give everybody an idea of what we're looking at when we say substantially threaten, the risk of hospitalization, long-term placement, death, dying, or, again, things that are going to make a major impact on somebody's life. Okay, what is not considered self-neglect in an APS investigation? So hoarding is not a self-neglect report unless it substantially threatens. Again, we did kind of touch on that a little bit. So again, does it impair essential self-care tasks, or does it otherwise threaten life or safety? So more than just clutter, more than just disorganization. And again, remembering that all people, alert and oriented, have the right to self-determine. If a person wants to live in a house that doesn't meet traditional standards of cleanliness, we cannot remove them. Unfortunately, that is a common theme. I think people unfortunately feel that we have that ability to go into somebody's home and remove them and place them. And actually, APS does not have that ability. It's a much greater process than that. And again, we would go back to, does the client have the capacity to understand the consequences of their actions? Do they understand everything fully? And if they do, then again, it goes back to they have the right to live in those conditions. The next area is financial exploitation. So financial exploitation is the unauthorized or illegal use of an adult's funds, property, or resources by a family member or caregiver, which causes a loss of money or property. Again, for this area, we get calls from all over the place. I mean, banks will call us directly. We coordinate a lot with the police departments too on financial exploitation cases. And ultimately, for adult protective services, the best way I kind of can term the way that we operate for financial cases is we're almost like the middleman, right? So we're going to look at a case and determine if there's possibly a criminal component. Is it more a civil component? Because if it's criminal, then we're going to want to be gathering bank statements, supporting evidence, and bring that over to the police department. And then ultimately, it would be their decision if they choose to open an active investigation or not. So we're kind of the middleman collecting all the evidence and data and bringing it over. Scams and fraud. Okay, so we do not investigate scams and fraud. So APS does not investigate financial exploitation by strangers, though we will refer them to our information and assistance department for an outreach phone call to check on them and give them a rundown of services and an attempt to offer some type of assistance. These are the different areas that we direct individuals to go if it's more of a scam or fraud type situation. So the different entities would be the Attorney General, the Medicare Fraud Hotline, and then the National Elder Fraud Hotline. But again, we're still going to take the information and we're going to make sure that that's passed on to the appropriate individual. What is not abuse, neglect, or exploitation? So it does not include cases of crimes by strangers such as telemarketing fraud, consumer fraud, internet fraud, home repair, muggings, burglaries, and landlord-tenant complaints. Very common theme that our agency sees is a lot of landlord-tenant complaints, and we as APS do not investigate those. Doesn't include cases of neighbor disputes or bickering. Does not include allegations against a school teacher, interaction in a classroom. Does not include issues concerning withdrawal from life support, monetary issues not related to financial exploitation, and cheating on time cards. The cheating on time cards we had thrown in there because again, we have a lot of individuals that were calling frequently stating that caregivers were either falsifying their time cards, clocking in and out appropriately. We don't handle any of that. That is not an APS area. A&E does not include complaints against law enforcement, attorneys, or inmate complaints towards correctional officers. It does not include concerns regarding home, business, auto, health, HMO, life, credit, or dental insurance. Again, there are some common themes kind of going back to the scams and fraud. We'll get phone calls for kind of the romance scams. Unfortunately, there are a lot of individuals that are online. So again, we've had people that truly believe that they're talking to celebrities and they're giving money over to them with the false perception that, you know, the person is in fact a celebrity when they're not. Again, taking that information, and a lot of the times we're even passing that over to the police department to see if there's anything that they can do. If somebody, we wanted to stress this information just for individuals that are kind of questioning if they should put in a report, kind of giving an idea of what information we're going to ask, right, and what we're going to gather from the reporter. So we're going to want the who, right? So who's the victim? We're going to get their name, their address, their phone, their age. Again, as much info as we can. So who's the abuser? Same information, right? We're going to want their address, their phone number, their age, their relationship to the client. And then we're going to ask if there's any witnesses or others that might have information. So then that way too, you know, again, we can kind of connect all the dots, get all of the pieces that are necessary. And then the what happened. So again, describe the situation. When did it happen? Because again, we typically cover allegations within the past year. So we're going to want to know when it happened. Is it continuing to happen? And then where? So again, is it in the community? Because that's primarily the area that we cover. Is it in a nursing home? So that's very important information for us. Now, if somebody is in a nursing home and they have the ability to go out on pass, let's say they're going on, you know, a visit with family for the weekend, and then a possible allegation comes in at that point while they're in the community, even though their permanent residence is that long-term care facility, if the allegation is that it took place in the community, we would take that then. The next thing that we look at after all of that gathered information is what is the priority, because that's going to tell our caseworkers how much time they have to respond. So for priority 1 calls, it's 24 hours. So those types of allegations are serious physical harm or immediate danger, and our sexual abuse allegations. Those are our priority 1s. Our priority 2 are less serious consequences than priority 1, and those are typically the cases that we see. So usually it is priority 2 for us. Priority 3 that's 7 days, that's going to be emotional abuse, financial exploitation, or with no immediate threat or harm. So again, the only time that we would see that 7 day window is for the emotional and financial exploitation. And then these are just some examples that we wanted to give to kind of illustrate, again, some of the things that we see and how we go about it. So the first example, the reporter states that the alleged abuser moved into the alleged victim's home about a year ago. The alleged abuser does not contribute to the rent, the bills, the groceries, doesn't work, and it may have a possible drug addiction. The alleged abuser is constantly badgering the AV to give them money and will get angry and yell at them if they refuse. They're screaming, they're swearing. The reporter feels that the alleged abuser is taking advantage of the alleged victim. They're using the AV for drug money, and the AV just gives them whatever because they ask for this stuff out of fear, right? So in this type of situation, it's actually going to be two allegations for us. So we've got the emotional component and we've got the financial component. And again, those are our area threes, meaning that our caseworkers have 7 days to go out to investigate those allegations. For a priority two, the example that we have is AA is the primary caregiver for the alleged victim, but isn't attending to the AV's needs. So the alleged victim hasn't had a shower in over a month. They smell of urine and feces. Their hair and clothes are dirty and stained. The house is dirty, covered with grime and filth, and is infested with bed bugs and has dog feces throughout the house. The reporter's not sure if the alleged victim is getting their medications or when the last time the alleged victim saw a doctor. So this type of situation, again, definitely a priority two for us. We're going to have to ask, some more probing questions to figure out which of the areas it may fall into to determine, is it possibly willful deprivation? Is it a passive neglect situation? Again, does the caregiver not have a full understanding of AV's needs, or are they intentionally depriving them of things? And then for our priority one, the alleged victim was brought to Northwestern McHenry for a bed sore evaluation. The alleged victim was septic. The alleged victim presented with severe bed sores on their arms, legs, backs, and buttocks. A wound the size of a softball was present on the AV's back. So the alleged victim had multiple tunneling wounds in excess of 10. So most were the size of a quarter, with one being dollar coin size. The alleged victim had an ulcer on the left ear. On both the front and back of the alleged victim were maggots. These maggots were not just in the pus-filled wounds, but also on the AV's breast and armpit area. Now, again, obviously very graphic example, right? But we just wanted to illustrate what we look at for something to meet that priority one criteria. Because again, 24 hours, that would mean that our caseworkers are expected, if that call comes in on a Friday, they have to go out even if it's the weekend, because typically our office hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. But with this type of situation and the severity of their wounds and everything that's taking place, we're going to have to make sure that we respond and act timely to investigate everything. And then just some additional information that we look to gather when we're taking an intake. So is this a dangerous situation? So is it a high crime neighborhood? Are there animals in the home, weapons in the home, drugs in the home, infestation, client family with mental illness in the home? Are there code violations? Again, our visits are typically unannounced. So we don't call ahead. We usually don't let anybody know that we're coming out because we want to see things at face value. So that's why it's very important for whoever is taking the report to gather these components, because again, it's a safety concern potentially for the caseworker that's going out. And then, does the client need immediate assistance? So again, using professional judgment on whether it would merit a call to 911 instead of just APS. Again, individuals will still call 911 and then they're letting us know too, and that's perfect. That's what we would expect. And then documenting those urgent needs of area on the intake form is what we're going to be doing. And then, does the client have any special needs for accommodation? So do they, have motor issues, hearing, vision, speech? We also ask, are they primarily Spanish speaking? Again, too, just so we know if we need to have an interpreter with, or the other entity that we use now too is the language line. And then in addition to some other things that we're looking at when we're taking an intake, does anyone else have information or know about the abuse? Again, any friends, neighbors, family members? Is there an emergency contact? Does the client have capacity mentally? Or maybe there's a guardian or POA involved. The only time that we don't immediately try to make contact with a client is if they have a guardian that is appointed, because again, we're going to have to start there. Any case that has a guardian, that's our first point of contact to get consent in order to investigate further. And then, where is the client currently located? So was the client transported to the hospital? Which hospital? Are they staying with another family member or in another town? Again, sometimes we have situations where an individual may reside in Lake County, right? But then they're at the hospital in McHenry County. So again, wherever the client is initially at the point of intake is the entity that is going to initially go out to do the investigation. So if somebody's at McHenry Hospital, Senior Services APS is going to go out and investigate that. Where again, if they're in Lake County, the Lake County Provider Agency is going to go out and investigate.